I'm going to hand it off to the producer of the newest movie by Ant-Man. Oh, I'm sorry. No, it's not. This is two M's. This is Henry, right? Have a great talk about quantum things and stuff. And he does cool stuff, apparently. So let's do it. Oh, also, we do have a kernelcon.org/survey, right? We actually read those things for some reason? No, for really, really good reasons, because we want to make this better every single year, every single time, no matter what we have to try to do, right? So please put that out there. All the things, all the stuff, all the comments, please help make this a better con for everyone. All right? Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you. So, as he said, I'm Henry McNeil. I just wanted to thank you all for coming to my talk. I know that this is the last talk of the conference. It's been definitely a long couple days, and I know if you did the training, it's been a few more. So again, really appreciate you being here. I'm here today to teach you a little bit about what quantum computing is, why you should care about it, maybe how you can start preparing for some advances in that field as they come along. And if you've seen or heard anything about quantum computing, it is more than likely some sort of thing about how it's going to break all of encryption, something equally terrifying to all of us as cybersecurity professionals. If you've been to other conferences that have a few more vendors and maybe charge you $2,500 plus to attend, you've probably seen either like parties hosted by quantum vendors or seen those ads on LinkedIn or anything like that. So they're definitely out there. They're talking about the doomsday scenarios. They're trying to sell you stuff. And, while it can be a little bit scary, and we do need to prepare, but best way of doing that is learning some of the basics and being able to understand what the landscape is and what you can do about it. So a little bit about me first. I started out as a software engineer after kind of wandering aimlessly in my early 20s and figuring out what I wanted to do with my life. But after being a software engineer, I got exposed to cybersecurity. I was like, holy crap, this is awesome. And now I am a product security engineer. Equally awesome, I am a dog dad to Jiggles the Corgi, who you see up there. I love board games, video games. I love cocktails. Omaha Old Market area here has a few really awesome cocktail bars. If you like rum, check out La Colono, Berry and Rye. Get a little further down, go to Mercury. Really great stuff out here if you're from out of town, or if you're local and you don't make it down this way too often. And finally, I am a quantum computing enthusiast. I had the opportunity to take a class on quantum as part of my master's degree and just fell in love with it, did my capstone project on it, and I'm really looking for opportunities to kind of just continue speaking about it and teaching people more about quantum computing. If you want to, you can follow me on Twitter, Mastodon, connect with me on LinkedIn. Happy to continue the conversation offline about anything quantum related later. So, why should we care about quantum computing? Well, first off, vendors are going to throw a lot of scary phrases at you and try to take your money. They are right now offering solutions like quantum key distribution, quantum random number generation, maybe small quantum computing modules, or even full quantum computers in some cases. You might also run into vendors offering quantum minotaurs to protect you from those pesky guardians. Watch out for that void burn. You'll see those scary phrases, maybe the quantum tipping point, doom, quantum supremacy, we've obtained it, nothing will ever be the same. Y2Q, it's coming, it's gonna be really bad. We can't tell you how, but it'll be bad. And so it's really hard to kind of cut through some of that stuff and know what is real and what's just the hype. Now, one thing that I do want everybody to know here is that quantum computing is real. It is not science fiction. It's here today. You can go out, you can run programs on real quantum computers today through, say, the IBM Quantum Experience, AWS Brackets. Azure has a quantum connected offering. Google has their quantum computer. other vendors are out there. You can buy specific annealing quantum computers from D-Wave. If you start searching for quantum computers today, you're going to get Google AdWords and stuff coming up. It's kind of wild, but they're out there. So aside from all of that scary stuff, there is some really cool stuff that quantum computers can do as well. And this is super exciting for me. So we're going to take a little derail here into computational complexity, which if you've taken an algorithms class or any computer science stuff, or you just talk to software developers and ask them, hey, can you solve this problem? And they're like, no. This is something that you might have crossed paths with before. So basically, quantum computers solve this class of problems called BQP. That stands for bounded error quantum polynomial time, which is a whole bunch of words. And basically what that means is that you can throw a quantum computer at this with relatively high chance of certainty. It's an arbitrary number, but people usually say like 75% of the time you get the correct solution. We'll get into why that is later. So you can throw your quantum computer at this, and as the size of the data set increases, the time to compute the solution increases in polynomial time. Now, there are these other classes of problems. P, which is just polynomial time, that's basically the stuff that your normal computer can solve really easily. You know, as you scale up the data set, it doesn't become too much more difficult to solve. And that can be things like, we have to sort this list, or I need to find some funny cat pictures on Google. Those are pretty easy problems to solve. And then there's this NP class, which includes those really hard problems to solve, where your software developers are like, oh my God, I can't believe this guy is asking me this again. I told him no. It is mathematically difficult. And those are things like the traveling salesman problem. How long, what's the shortest route for this guy to visit all these different cities and return to the starting point with different distances between them? And that's just something that we can't solve easily right now. There are a lot of big unsolved problems in computer science around this that, we can get into that. That's a whole other separate talk, probably for a different, not cybersecurity conference. But most interestingly, BQP, this quantum solvable space, covers polynomial, some of this non-deterministic polynomial, NP space, some generalized problems, and some other problems that don't fall into any of those categories. And then you've got this maybe little area of problems down here in the corner. Those are really weird. Don't talk to them. But most interestingly, this BQP space includes some other things like, say, integer factorization or discrete logarithms. Any cryptography nerds out there, you guys know, if we can solve those really quickly and efficiently, that is really bad for the internet. So that's maybe a little scary here. Can we go to my next slide, please? Oh, yeah. So anyways, it's okay today. Don't panic. Quantum computers can solve some of these problems, and they can do it efficiently. There are lots of problems that quantum computers can't solve efficiently. Remember that little here there be dragons space down there. And also, even for some of those problems that quantum computers can solve, like breaking the factorization behind RSA or elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman or any of these other public key cryptography systems that we're using today, quantum computers are not mature enough to crack those right now. Even if we assume, say, like the NSA and China have these quantum supercomputers that are 10 or 100 times better than what other quantum computing vendors are advertising out there right now, those still cannot even scratch the surface of, say, RSA 2048. So it's still not a threat, might be coming, but we have a little time to relax and prepare. So let's start out by understanding a little bit more about what quantum computers actually are and what they can do. So obviously the first place for us to start is with Schrödinger's wave equation. This is probably the most important equation in quantum mechanics. And we can see it here for a one-dimensional relativistic particle. And this is, oh my God, confusing. And we're okay. We don't need to actually go into this. Sorry for showing the scary differential equation, right? We're cybersecurity people. We are not physics doctoral candidates. And just like you don't need to know the details of how solid state physics works within a transistor to run Nmap, you don't need to know the details of Schrodinger's equations to run stuff on a quantum computer. So hooray for abstraction. So what the heck is quantum computing? Well, simply put, quantum mechanics plus computing. Now, quantum mechanics is this whole area of physics that is super weird, super confusing. You can get multiple PhDs in the subject and still not really understand it. If you want to take a basic quantum mechanics course, usually that requires about 2 years of undergraduate math and physics to even take an entry-level course. So it's a lot. It's complicated math. But I can save you a couple $1,000s of tuition, and I can tell you this quick summary. Really small stuff behaves really weird. And then there's a whole ton of math on top of that. That's what they charge you for. But the short version is, most things that we observe macroscopically, a chair, a microphone, your car, those behave in a normal way. You put your car somewhere, it probably stays there. You leave a chair at your dining table, it stays there. Some macroscopic things like car keys and socks, they may behave weird, but physics don't understand that. But these subatomic particles, say, an electron, a photon, the things that make up all of the matter around us, if you look at them individually, not when they're part of a chair, they behave really, really weird. So they can do things like this photon acts like a wave when you're not looking at it. And then when you do observe it, then suddenly it's a particle. And so it says, oh no, I'm right here. But then you turn your back and suddenly it's in this fuzzy, weird area and it behaves in totally different ways and exhibits other weird properties. And so it's all like super strange. It doesn't make any sense when you think about it from this is why I observe in the universe perspective, but it's all experimentally verifiable and there are some really cool things that you can do. So hooray science. And quantum computing takes all of these things and uses them to perform computation. And that can be through several different implementations, whether it's maybe little superconducting loops of current, individual photons that we fire out of a laser really carefully and precisely. Maybe we have a particular atom and we've knocked all the electrons off of it so it has some charge and we were able to trap it in the magnetic field and observe its properties, or even these like annealing quantum computers which maybe make use of some of these other properties and implementations but really just solve a certain class of problems really specifically really well but can't be generalized. We're not going to really talk about those annealing ones today because they're not a general case. But they're pretty interesting if you want to research further. So let's elaborate a little bit on what some of that weirdness is. Now, one of the main principles of quantum mechanics is this concept of superposition. And that means that a quantum system can be in multiple states at once. This is kind of the magic behind quantum computing, first and foremost. So if you think about a bit in a computer, it's a 1 or a 0. It's on or off. If you have a coin, it's heads or it's tails. But if you think about that coin, you take it, you flip it, while it's in the air and it's spinning end over end over end, it's kind of in both states at once, right? Like, it's neither heads or tails, it's spinning. And so, in quantum mechanics, it's a little bit more complex than that because we know, okay, if we look at it really closely, at one point or the other, it's always heads or tails or kind of on its edge or a weird angle or whatever. It's a coin. But in quantum mechanics, it's basically both. It's like simultaneously heads or tails. And then you get into this other property where it becomes one or the other when we measure it. And so you try to catch the coin, or in my case, the coin falls on the floor and then you have to go and look at it. And then we see, oh yeah, okay, it's heads. Same thing with quantum. If you observe this and you say, okay, it's in a superposition of spinning up and down, and then we measure it and then we say, oh, I guess it's down now. That's that weirdness where when you observe it, the behavior changes, and just, it's super weird. A classic thought example of this is Schrodinger's cat. So that's a thought experiment where Erwin Schrödinger came up with, we put this cat in a box, I assume it had probably just pooped in his shoes or something, and we have this vial of poison in the box and a hammer and a subatomic radioactive source, and when that radioactive source decays, then the hammer breaks the vial and the cat dies. And we put it in this sealed box where we can't observe it. And because it's tied to this quantum phenomena, it actually puts the entire system, cat and everything, into a superposition state where the cat is both alive and dead. So the next time your cat is misbehaving, maybe threaten them with this. They probably won't listen. We know cats. Another property of quantum mechanics is entanglement. This is a really weird phenomena where you can have two particles or more where the state of an individual particle cannot be described alone. There is no way of separating it from the other particles. And so what that means when you look at this phenomena of things changing when they're measured is that if I measure this particle over here, and I've got another particle over here that it's entangled with, my measurement on this particle immediately causes this other particle's, we call it a waveform, to collapse. And so we've now measured both particles, even though we only interacted with this one. And that can interact across a vast distance. This comes into some of the quantum equations that we'll talk about later. So even when they're physically separated, this entanglement property holds. And then finally, there's this principle of interference. This one's pretty straightforward. We can see this today. If you have noise-canceling headphones, that's how they work. They play some interfering frequencies that tune out the background noise by interfering destructively, so it suppresses. If you think waves on the ocean, they're coming along, you get a bigger wave, and then they amplify, and you get really big breakers at some point. Now, in this quantum case, it's basically made of probability waves. Don't try and visualize that after a multiple-day cybersecurity conference. You will regret it. But we can use that interference property to basically nudge our calculations and make it so that we have measurements that collapse in the direction that we want. We can get heads more often than not. So to kind of sum up and talk about how quantum computing differs from classical. Well, one of the big ways, you can see a quantum computer up on the slide here. This is one of IBM's. That does not look a whole lot like your desktop unless you were really, really into case modding back in the 90s, early 2000s. Anybody out there? But one of the things that really differs is that quantum computers use qubits instead of bits. So that's a quantum bit. That's one of these like superposition states. It's an individual atom, it's an individual photon. That's representing information, and it has all of those weird quantum mechanical properties. Whereas the bits in your computer, it's a 1 or a 0. Like, if you've done really deep dive into it, you know that there's kind of like this voltage and a range. But ultimately, when we measure it, if it's, close enough to 5, it's a 1. If it's close enough to 0, it's a 0. And if it's in between, it rounds up or down. And that's just what happens. Quantum computers are also analog instead of digital. So that means basically that these quantum states, these qubits, hold arbitrary precision information in a sense. It's not something where your digital computer, you can only express, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1, whatever. Your qubit is in some weird state that's kind of like an angular representation somewhere in the middle with arbitrary infinite precision. Quantum computers are also probabilistic versus deterministic. So if you run a quantum program 100 times, you're maybe going to get one answer 75 times and different answers the other 25% of the time. If you run a classical program 100 times, you probably get the same result 100 times, unless you have been complaining about how this doesn't work and you called somebody else over to look at your program and then you run it. It's not going to behave the same way. Another main way, quantum computers right now, they are operating at a very, very low circuit-based level. Your computers today, you are so far abstracted from addressing individual bits and bytes and calling specific gate operations. You just, most of the time, don't need to know that. Closest you maybe get is like that assembly level malware analysis, where you're still looking at pretty big groups of bytes. And quantum computing right now, we are really kind of focused on this like circuit level operation where you're going to be saying like apply an X gate to qubit 0. And it's really kind of a different way that you need to be thinking about it, at least today, although there is some work being done towards abstracting that further, which is, as a former software engineer, really exciting. Again, they can solve that different class of problems that classical computers can't tackle, so that's super cool. Oh, and there's this other weird major difference, which is the no cloning theorem. So, you know, if you are out there and you're downloading movies on your work laptop and getting broken into, you can download that movie, other people can copy that movie from you, we can share data around, make infinite copies, that's awesome. With qubits, you can't clone them. If you have a quantum state, and this is a mathematically provable thing, you cannot copy that quantum state. So that creates a lot of challenges when it comes to how we think about applications of quantum computing. If you want to get to some state, you basically have to recreate it from scratch every time, because I can't save this to my hard drive, I can't give a copy to my wife, I can't transmit it over the internet and keep a copy back here for myself to look at. So you don't really have like quantum RAM, you don't really have quantum storage, you don't have ways of like backing up your work mid-computation. So just kind of a different approach here. And finally, why should we care? Well, obviously, as I covered before, quantum computing can efficiently break some public key cryptography, namely behind RSA and a lot of the other cryptographic protocols that we use in HTTPS. And that includes, of course, like digital signatures and stuff, not just the encryption. It also allows for more efficient brute force searches. And so that can target things like your hashing algorithms, you know, MD5, SHA-256, any of the other ones that are out there that are in use. It targets symmetric encryption, so DES, AES, you know, RC4, RC5, SALSA, whatever you're using across your org. And it also has those really cool applications. Some of those BQP problems that are hard for us to solve, those can fall into machine learning. In chemistry and physics, quantum systems, notoriously difficult to model. But if you have an actual quantum system there, surprisingly, those are really good at modeling other quantum systems. Who knew? Finance, of course. You know, you get a lot of research into quantum computing coming out of the big banks and stock brokerages because, hey, if you can use quantum stuff and figure out the stock market, you're making a ton of money. So, a few things, though, about what quantum computing isn't. These are maybe kind of my list of frequently asked questions, some answers to it, preempting that. And you might also see some stuff in the marketing material about this. So, quantum computing is not actually computing every solution simultaneously. It works okay to think about it that way, but it's kind of a pet peeve. Really, we are putting things into an unknown state that's, you know, equal probability of one or the other. And we're using those principles of interference and superposition to work through the algorithm and tease out the best solution. But we're not going through and actually like doing the full calculation for everything at the same time. Quantum computing is not just some mega fast billion terahertz CPU. Don't think of it that way. Talking about quantum processors in terms of clock speeds and stuff, just, it doesn't make sense right now, because you're dealing with those low-level gates and addressing those. You're a little concerned about the gate speed versus how long it takes for that qubit to just get noisy and decay and turn into some unusable garbage. But don't think about it like, oh, my CPU is this fast and now I get a quantum one and it's 100 times faster. Quantum computing is also not storing petabytes of data in one qubit. Like, I talk about that infinite precision analog state, but if you want to get something usable out of there, you have to measure it, and that means you get one bit of data. Or in a really cool edge case, you can get 2 bits of data. So at most, 1 qubit translates to 2 bits of data. So not a replacement for your hard drive or anything. It's also not going to replace your gaming PC. You're not going to be playing the sweet Atari game on there anytime soon. And it's also not breaking RSA today. So let's get into some of the algorithms next. Now, one of the most basic and pretty cool algorithms is quantum teleportation. So this actually allows us to use a couple of entangled particles, and we can teleport an arbitrary quantum state by transmitting just 2 classical bits of information. And this doesn't violate relativity, even though it uses entanglement, because we still have to transmit some of those classical measurements. And really interestingly, we can actually reverse this process and use that for what's called super dense coding. So if you have 2 entangled quantum states that you've shared, you can basically reverse that and get 2 classical bits out of it from measuring your qubit. This sounds pretty cool. People like to talk about, like, oh man, we have quantum teleportation. People teleported something. You're actually just teleporting information, so this isn't going to give us Star Trek transporters anytime soon. We can't put Spock in here and have him appear over there. Next up, this is probably one of the most interesting and practical applications for quantum computing today. We're going to talk a little bit about quantum key distribution, and specifically the BB84 variant of that, because it's pretty easy to explain. So this is a process that lets us establish a classical encryption key, which could be symmetric, asymmetric, anything. It's a bunch of random bits that we can use secretly. And we do this using quantum principles. So to kind of explain this, we have 2 parties who are sharing entangled photons. And I'm transmitting them over to Bob. And so we're going to, I'll keep 1, Bob receives 1, I'm sending a 1 or a 0 value as my random thing, and I'm transmitting it with a laser at either like a 0 degree or a 45 degree polarization. And so Bob receives these qubits. Bob doesn't know what polarization I've used to transmit them, and so Bob has to guess. Now, if Bob guesses the same as what I used to send over my photon, then Bob gets the same 0 or 1 measurement. If Bob guesses wrong, then it's 50% chance that Bob gets the right value and 50% chance he gets the wrong one. So after I've sent all of these bits over, Bob's captured, measured, then we do this public comparison of, I just announce, okay, I sent photon 1 with a 0 degree basis, and photon 2 at 45 degree polarization, and so on and so forth. And any spots where we disagree, we throw those bits out, and we keep the rest. So far so good. This is basically just a lot of extra work for sending over some random numbers, right? But the cool bit here is that we can now detect an eavesdropper on this channel with arbitrary precision. So if you put somebody in the middle, they also don't know what basis I've been using to transmit the photons. So they have to guess, and then they have to retransmit something further along. And when they're in the middle and they're guessing, they're going to introduce other errors, because you can kind of see, half the time the eavesdropper and Bob will agree, and half the time they'll disagree. And so you're going to get extra errors into your final key. So after we've exchanged this, we've done this public comparison of how I sent these photons over, we compare some number of bits of the final key, either at the end or selected randomly or whatever we want to do. And basically, if some amount of those bits disagree, we know that there's an eavesdropper in there, and we can say, okay, let's switch to a different channel and retransmit using that, and we can try to catch an eavesdropper there the same way. So this is really cool. This is something that has been experimentally realized today. This has been going on for quite some time. The algorithm was originally developed in 1984, and there have been a bunch of other flavors that have come along to maybe solve different challenges or just apply a different process, maybe get some more efficiencies. There's this device-independent QKD that addresses some of these trust and calibration issues that come up in this. There's a twin field quantum key distribution that tries to address some of the range limitations. But this is something you can actually like find people marketing this today. If you say, oh man, QKD sounds really cool, I want to go out and buy something that does this, somebody will sell you that, and it'll work. You might or might not need it, but you can do it. Next up, let's talk about Grover's algorithm, or the quantum search algorithm. Now, this is one of kind of the big two quantum algorithms that you will probably hear about if you start diving into any sort of class. Now, Grover's algorithm is basically something that allows us to do function reversal. Or, in other terms, we can basically perform a search over some space as though it were ordered data, even when it's not. So, I'm not going to go too much into the implementation here, but to kind of understand the implications of this. So imagine you're trying to brute force an AES key. Now, like our naive approach, let's say we try key 1, and then we try key 2, and then 3, and so on and so forth up to 2 to the 128th. It's going to take us a long time to get there. But imagine if we try, a key at 2 to the 64th. And our algorithm tells us, okay, that's not the right key, but the right key is lower. Then we can guess something at, say, 2 to the 32nd. And it tells us, oh, that's higher. Now we're basically like cutting the search space in half every time. I guess it would be 2 to the 63rd, not 64th. But anyways, my bad numbers aside here, basically we can cut the search space on that key in half every time. So 127, 126, so on and so forth. And that's huge. That cuts the effective number of guesses that we would need to make for AES to brute force a key down dramatically. And that can effectively cut your key lengths in half. This Grover's algorithm, it's kind of scary because it could potentially work for any sort of function where you have a function and you have some output and you can gain value out of being able to ask relatively efficiently, like, what input produces this output? So, hey, how do I get a hash collision for SHA? Or what's the plain text that corresponds to this ciphertext? So that's really bad if we can easily find those values. Now, it doesn't dramatically slow things down. It's at most by a factor of the square root of the search space. So again, if you have a 128-bit key, it's effectively cut in size down to a 64-bit key, which, in some cases, that's really pretty scary. If you're going from, say, 256 down to 128, you still have a great deal of security there. But some of those, 64 or lower, we don't really want to mess with those anymore. Another scary quantum algorithm is Shor's algorithm, which was developed in 1994 by Peter Shor, who you can see on the slide. He is also a poet. He has a few quantum limericks out there, which are pretty hilarious, terrible. It's like the dad joke equivalent of poetry, but they're great. Go look them up. And Shor's algorithm is the one that this effectively solves integer factorization, which again, hey, we use that in a lot of places because we think that's a hard problem. And if this algorithm says, actually, it's pretty easy, we can get an exponential speed up in how we solve this over the best known things that classical computers can do, then suddenly that has really bad implications for cryptography, at least the public key variant. So Shor's algorithm is actually kind of this cool mix of classical and quantum algorithm. So it uses this classical piece basically to kind of spit out a whole bunch of different guesses of what could be good factors for this prime number. And then it puts it through this quantum Fourier transform, which is, frequency spectrum analysis is typically the application we see for the Fourier transform. And so then that can really efficiently be like, hey, this factor looks really good. Try that, iterate on it. And, it is really complicated to implement and understand. at some point, I'd love to do like a super technical deep dive, nerd out on all the implementations of QFT. That's a really cool algorithm that usually takes in, at least in my undergraduate class, I think we spent like 4 days going over it. So it's a lot of stuff, a little more time than I have here. The scary part about it breaking RSA, that's great, but it also requires lots and lots and lots of qubits to break RSA. So the current best state quantum computers that are out there today, those are able to factor the number 35. That's a 6-bit number. So if you're using 6-bit RSA keys, please move away from those. Those are no longer quantum safe. Please use at least like a 10-bit RSA key. Then you have quantum security. Thank you, my talk is done. No, so, 35, you can do that in your head. So this is like a really, really trivial implementation of this. But it's pretty cool, and, we know like Moore's law, computers double in power. I don't know if there's a quantum equivalent quite yet. We're still really in the infancy of building quantum computers. But it is not infeasible that we get to this, lots of qubits number, which is somewhere in the tens of millions, maybe, in the not too distant future. And then, your RSA 2048 is going to be very easily breakable. Moving on from Shor's algorithm, there is also Schnorr's algorithm, which is actually not a quantum algorithm, but I need to discuss it here because there have been some really interesting recent developments in this space. So I believe it was in 2021, this scientist, Klaus-Peter Schnorr, develops this process, which is like a more efficient factoring method. And so he writes this paper, and he puts in his abstract, this destroys the RSA cryptosystem, which obviously, I'm sure as soon as that popped onto archive.org, somebody at the NSA was like, holy crap. And that's a really bold claim. So people did a lot of really deep dive math stuff into this paper, and they found that it's an interesting idea, but it really only applies in certain cases where you have really bad choice of primes. And some of the things that you're doing in this paper are maybe actually not as fast as you're saying it is because it just applied in this one case. But as all great science does, people looked at it, examined it, iterated on it, and figured out, hey, maybe we can use quantum computers for this piece that people said you got wrong. And so at the end of 2022, this group of Chinese researchers made the claim that they were able to use quantum computing techniques on this Schnorr's algorithm and basically solve that really tricky math piece in there that was not as efficient as he had hoped, but do it really efficiently on a quantum computer. And also, this is kind of the scary part, they said, hey, based on our calculations here, you could break RSA with a 2048-bit key using only 372 qubits. That's a lot less than tens of millions. And IBM's Osprey quantum computer, which is their top of the line, at least as of a few weeks ago when I was putting the slides together, that has 433 qubits. So could we break RSA 2048 with this today? Maybe, but probably not, is the answer. So there's been a lot of controversy around this. One piece is people saying, even if you have a quantum speed up on this part, this probably is not actually faster than a classical computer brute force because of all of the other work that has to be done and because of the current state of quantum computers. There's still some dispute about even though this seems really interesting, it might only work on certain cases. You might still have some bad assumptions baked into this algorithm. So it's very much still a developing situation. Science is kind of slow, but this is one to keep an eye on, I would say. Of all of the quantum algorithms I've seen, this is the one that I really want to be okay, maybe we need to think about some of these post-quantum algorithms a little faster. So if you see developments like this team is announcing that they have broken some of the RSA 1024 challenge numbers, then you're allowed to panic at least a little bit. Definitely think about like maybe cryptographic agility and being prepared to update our TLS and stuff is a good thing for us. So this is really just kind of a subset of quantum algorithms. Obviously, there are a ton of really smart people out there researching. They're developing new algorithms all the time. And it's definitely it's a cool space to keep your eyes on. And none of these are like your specific algorithms that like your bank can use to crack the stock market or anything even. Like there are people doing awesome research there, and they're obviously keeping it secret. So let's get into some of those maybe more tangible recommendations. Now we've gotten the scary stuff out of the way. We've gotten the sciencey stuff out of the way. Let's talk about how to prepare. So one thing that I hit on, if we break RSA, like what are we supposed to do? Well, the good news is that there is plenty of math out there that is still too hard for quantum computers to solve. We don't have any known algorithms that can attack those, more than maybe Grover's algorithm, which is generalizable, but still leaves you with potentially a massive search space for a well-constructed problem. So we go out, we do a whole ton of math, and we find those new hard problems, and then we turn them into encryption standards. NIST has been undergoing this process of developing post-quantum cryptographic standards for, I think, close to a decade now, maybe longer. And this is basically just a set of classical algorithms that are hard for quantum computers to solve. And last summer, NIST actually put out its public key finalist and a few digital signature finalists, which they're in the process of standardizing further. And they're currently reviewing additional options for signatures, hashing, and I believe they want some other public key or at least key establishment algorithms out there at the moment. So if you're a brilliant cryptographer and you want to still get in on this, it's awesome. It's ongoing. It is definitely way beyond me, the level of math in this, but it's super fascinating just to see what's happening. It is worth keeping in mind, though, that just because these are quantum-safe algorithms, it does not mean that they are not vulnerable to non-quantum attacks, potentially. The recent finalist, I believe it was the dilithium or its kyber crystals. I can't remember which off the top of my head here. But there's actually a paper describing basically an AI-driven side channel attack against that algorithm that was super effective. And like it's a niche case, but it still maybe calls into question some of these post-quantum algorithms still. You don't need a quantum computer to do that. So what can we do about all of this? Again, first off, don't panic yet. You still have plenty of time, I think, to make well-reasoned decisions on how you can best mitigate these risks of quantum computing within your organization. You have time to go out and learn not just the basics in an hour-long talk at the end of a long conference, but really do like a deeper dive or put one of your really nerdy software engineers on this in your org. They will love it, I can promise you. But take the time, make those well-reasoned decisions, have a strategy. Do be prepared to transition to those post-quantum algorithms when they are standardized and you feel confident. As we all know, transitioning something like our organization's cryptography standard is not something that happens overnight. I can almost guarantee, like if we do, raise your hand if you still have a service using DES for some encryption here. Please don't, but I can guarantee you that almost all of you who have a company that's been around for longer than 10 years, you probably still have something that's doing that. Or even just devs who are not trained who are like, oh, somebody said DES is good encryption. Let's put this in here. Perfect. We're secure. Like, people don't necessarily understand cryptography, so it's easy to misconfigure. It's harder to know what algorithms we're using, what data we're storing, like what our data security model across our organization is. Those are really big problems in cybersecurity. And so we can today, before we go in, before we make any code changes, any configuration changes, we can start collecting that cryptographic inventory. We can learn where is our sensitive data stored, how is it encrypted, and how much of a pain in the ass would it be to change the encryption under that. And if you say, like, okay, scary quantum computers that break all of our encryption are coming in 10 years, maybe it's going to take 10 years to change all of that stuff in your org. So if you go out and you start looking at some of this today, that's going to give you a huge leg up instead of like, oh yeah, also people are going to be decrypting all of our secrets for the next 10 years until we got our stuff updated. You can also consider like, AES is still secure, but maybe consider bumping your key lengths up. If you're using AES with a 128-bit key today, just go out, try to bump that up to 256 everywhere you can for all of your new stuff you're encrypting. Next up, don't buy the snake oil. You're going to have vendors coming out and trying to sell you scary quantum stuff with a lot of those phrases. Really think in depth about whether you actually need this or not. You probably today, you don't need quantum key distribution unless you're in a position where you are sending keys from one HSM to another one, and you've got people like doing the 3-part XOR dance, and you're flying them across the country, and you have to do this every week, and it's a pain in the butt. Hey, maybe you could actually benefit from quantum key distribution. If you are running an online casino, maybe you actually would benefit from quantum random number generation. Maybe you really want that like absolute little edge that gives you over a potentially flawed other RNG. If you have one of those specific problems that an annealing quantum computer can solve, that might be awesome for you. Go out, look into it, buy one. Otherwise, if you're in one of those industries like chemistry, physics, finance, you probably don't need to buy a quantum computer today. You probably don't need to pay for time on a cloud-based quantum computer, anything like that. But maybe you want to start thinking about, would it benefit me to have some people on staff who understand quantum computing, and they can look for these problems when they come up in our organization, and then they can go, holy crap, that's a quantum problem. We can solve this. Let's do it. That might give you a massive strategic and competitive advantage in the future. So think about maybe starting to build up some of that talent, or at least people with an interest. And finally, just stay informed, learn, and experiment. This is a growing industry. It is kind of ever-changing. There's a lot of stuff to cover here. I'm just scratching the surface in this talk, and if you can just get excited about it, poke around online, there is a lot of great stuff out there and plenty of good ways that you can do some learning. So, a couple of my favorites here that I'll just recommend. There is a Quark simulator. This is like a web-based quantum simulator that's drag and drop. You can drop little gates onto your qubits. You can observe the in-between quantum states of the output. It's really cool. Like, it visualizes, it moves around and everything. And you can just kind of like tinker with it. You can pick, like, just show me what does Grover's algorithm look like and drop it on here. Super cool. If you want to get a little more advanced, there's the IBM quantum simulator. And you can log in, you can sign up for IBM. They've got a similar thing as Quark, but you drag and drop your circuit, and then you can run it either on a simulator or one of IBM's quantum computers. And that's like a totally visual thing where you're just dragging and dropping gates like Lego pieces. If you want to get more into the programming, Microsoft has a Q# language. Of course they do. And that's for quantum programming. There are also a million Python frameworks. Again, of course there are. PyTicket, Qiskit, plenty of others that are all designed for doing quantum computing and interacting with quantum computers. Those are super cool, super accessible. There's tons of great tutorials out there. Qiskit in particular, you can hook up to the IBM cloud, and so you can write a Python program and run that on a quantum computer just by pasting in an API key. It's free unless you want to run on one of the really big, fancy, advanced quantum computers, but you can just go out and you can tinker with this stuff, and you can have it render circuits for you and visualize like a block sphere, which is a qubit representation, all this cool stuff. Now, if you're I just want to curl up with the good book by the fire, there's some great textbooks out there. I don't think there's any exciting novels. Brandon Sanderson hasn't written a quantum computing textbook yet. But you can read things like, these were a couple that really helped me. Intro to Quantum Computing covers the physics and the science and makes it relatively understandable with a college computer science or cybersecurity education. Quantum Computing and Applied Approach goes into a lot of really like specific hands-on, let's write some code to do these things. It has, I think, probably like a 10-page implementation of Shor's algorithm and Qiskit in there that you can really walk through. So that's a fantastic text. That second one is also pretty cheap. It's like $20 on Amazon right now. So kind of cool. Beyond that, there's a ton more resources than what I could cover on here. I do have a GitHub. It's down here, github/vidmaster quantum-mania, non-copyright infringing. And I put a few links up there. The first link on that page is a link to this awesome quantum computing repository, which has a ton of great stuff on it. Tons and tons of links. I just have a few on my page of kind of curated things that I really like. There are other conference talks, entire conferences, YouTubers, academic papers, blogs, documentation, plenty more out there. So, I, of course, feel like since I'm wrapping up the talk today and wrapping up the conference, I'm just going to kind of throw out some maybe grounded and maybe wild speculation about the future of quantum computing here. So there's definitely a lot of hype. You get the companies and they're talking about, like, Google said they obtained quantum supremacy in 2016 or something. Because they survived solving this really weird edge case problem, and they did it really fast with a quantum computer, and it has no practical applications for anything, and like the world hasn't changed since they announced that, really. So, be leery of that. The field is really still in its infancy. There are these exciting developments, but it's kind of moving slowly. Actually building and engineering these quantum computers is a tremendous challenge when you look at what needs to be done to matter, to examine it in a way that we can use it for calculations. It's things like, okay, we have this quantum computer, but you need to cool all of the qubits down to negative 273 Kelvin. And so we're like, micro degrees above absolute zero. That's pretty hard. Things like quantum error correction, quantum noise are huge challenges. And there are physicists out there questioning, like, are we really just kind of hitting the limits of what is humanly possible with material science? Are we ever actually going to be able to scale these things to be as big as we need them in order to solve practical problems? I think we are. I try to be optimistic about this stuff. I think that we are going to see these quantum computers that are capable of breaking RSA, Grover's algorithm implementations that are capable of solving really interesting problems, and plenty more things in the next 10 to 20 years. We're going to see new algorithms that are going to continue being developed. We're going to see new threats to cryptography. We're going to see new ways that this can change medicine, science, finance, all sorts of things. And I think it's going to be really exciting. So thank you all for listening. I hope that this talk was, something that got you at least a little bit educated and a little bit excited about quantum computing. And if not, at least we had a couple of memes and some cute dog pictures. No guarantees on whether those memes were dank, no cap. No promises there, but, I put them in at least. So I think we've got a few minutes at the end here for questions, if anybody has anything. In the back. So it doesn't actually work specifically, like it's not spitting out above or below. The actual implementation of Grover's algorithm uses uses an oracle that if you are producing a correct answer, it weights it with a phase shift. So that's a little technical. But basically, you can sort of iterate through this, and it amplifies the probability of reaching a correct answer every time you run through your oracle. and you put a superposition of qubits into that. So you have a bunch of qubits that are all at a like 45-degree angle, or an equal probability of measuring a 1 or a 0. And so you put it into there, and so you've got, all answers are equally probable at the start, and then you cycle and iterate and nudge towards this correct answer every time. So that's kind of like the really short 1-minute explanation of how that works. Oh, I think I saw another question over here somewhere. Yeah. Yeah. So programming languages like Q#. Yes. So the question was for programming languages like Q# or those Python frameworks. Are there environments where you maybe are actually going to see those, or do you need like a quantum computer to run them on? And the answer is like you can run those languages, you can install them and everything on your classical computer. And for the quantum calculations, you connect up with like a cloud API key and tell it, okay, I wrote my program here, go run it on the cloud quantum computer. So you could go into your office, you can do pip install Qiskit, write your Python code in PyCharm, same as the rest of your enterprise apps you're developing. And then you put in your IBM quantum key and you run it on the quantum computer and you get your results. So yeah, if you have those problems that you're like, hey, I could solve this and there's a quantum computer that's big enough out there right now that I could do this, perfect. You can get your API key and fire it off. And you can do it in your own normal development workflow. So yeah. Yes. So some of these can be expensive if you are running the quantum programs on the actual quantum hardware. Like AWS has their bracket service, which, it's cool. We've got quantum computing in the cloud, doubly in the cloud. Like that's neat, but it gets really expensive really fast. So play around with those simulators. Like they're free. You can, while it's computationally expensive to simulate qubits and you're not getting like the real quantum experience, you can run stuff on a simulator on your local machine up to, depending on how capable you are, between probably like 8 to 16 qubits. 16 is probably really pushing the limits, but I've been able to run simulations with 10 qubits on my MacBook, no problem. So it's totally doable. You can play around a little for free. Yeah. Because once you start scaling past that like 10 or so qubits, the computational level it takes to actually like represent a qubit with any amount of precision just kind of increases exponentially. So you really quickly hit like, if I'm running something with that, 10 qubit range, I'm using, I think I was hitting maybe like 16 gigabytes of RAM or so that I was consuming for it, and going up beyond that went really quick. Yeah, they can certainly simulate some of those things. It's not necessarily, though, going to be like more efficient because you're having to run so much classical computation behind the scenes also. Like space limitations aside, it's not necessarily faster than hitting this with a laser pulse and it immediately goes into this quantum state and we measure it. Instead, it's like we're running all of this stuff on gigabytes of data to analyze. So you could simulate pretty well, and lots of like physics and chemistry shops are doing that just to gain better understandings of quantum phenomena today. But it only scales so far before you're like, okay, this is just too slow and our classical algorithms are going to be more efficient. So, but fantastic question though. Yeah, I think we got time for one more. So the question was, are there limitations or problems that quantum computers cannot solve? And yes, absolutely. A lot of the sort of proposed NIST finalists in their post-quantum initiative, those are things that again, like I'm not a mathematician, so I don't know if there's like a proof saying that this cannot ever be solved by a quantum computer, but we have no known ways of solving this. And there's lots of big like unsolved problems in computer science around this right now of like what's solvable and what's not. But those NIST things, a lot of the time they deal with things like finding two nearest points in a high dimensional lattice and things like that. And those we don't have an efficient way of solving those with a quantum computer, and the math doesn't support that we'll be able to do that right now. Could always change as we learn more about the universe, but right now, yes, there are plenty of things that are not solvable with quantum computers. So that is time. I believe our staff has some closing remarks that they would like to make, and I will stop ranting at you now. You guys can go home in a few minutes. Hooray.